Imagine a child holding out their heart with both hands, unhardened, untainted, full of radiant trust, and someone slaps it away without hesitation. Imagine the part of you that never wanted to harm anyone, the part that still believed in miracles, in loyalty, in the good you saw in others. That purest part, your most innocent self, was not just misunderstood, it was betrayed, mocked, crushed beneath the weight of someone else's darkness. And now, you carry within you a silent ache, not because you lost something material, but because someone shattered what was most sacred within you. They didn't just hurt you, they injured the very essence of who you are, the part of you that loved without limit, that forgave without being asked, that trusted despite every warning sign. And while the world may have forgotten, while those around you may have dismissed your pain, God has not turned away. God never turns away from the cries that come from the deepest part of our being, the part still untouched by pride, ambition, or vengeance. Do you remember the time you chose kindness over retaliation? The moment you forgave someone who didn't even acknowledge your pain? The days you kept showing up with a smile, when all you wanted was to scream, cry, or disappear? Those were not small moments. Those were divine moments. Moments when heaven leaned a little closer because you resembled something more than human endurance. You resembled holiness. And when that holiness was hurt, God did not ignore it. He took it personally. There's a sacredness in innocence that the world no longer recognizes. We are taught to be clever, guarded, strategic, to play the game. But what happens when someone chooses to be real, open, honest, and is met with betrayal instead of love? The world says, you should have known better, but God says, they should have trembled before touching what I made pure. You didn't lose because you were naive. You were hurt because your heart refused to conform to a world that feeds on masks and manipulation. But here's a truth many never realize until it's too late. Hurting a pure heart isn't a simple offense. It's a spiritual violation. And while others laughed, belittled, or moved on, God wrote it down. He took notes not just of what they did. Your innocence became evidence, and heaven became your witness. Now the question is no longer if God saw. He did. The question is, what will he do with what he saw? And that is where the story changes. Because God doesn't just comfort the wounded, he defends them. He doesn't just observe injustice, he overturns it. And those who harmed you, the ones who laughed while you bled, are not just facing guilt, they are now facing divine intervention. So as you sit in the quiet, wondering why you still feel broken, wondering why those who harmed you seem untouched, understand this. Your healing may be quiet, but their consequences will be loud. Not because you asked for vengeance, but because you never did. This is not about bitterness. This is about justice, not your version, not the world's version, but God's version. And that justice begins when God rises not just as your comforter, but as your defender. And he has already risen. Now let us walk through the truths you need to know. Truths that will anchor your heart in the knowledge that your pain was not invisible, that your innocence was not wasted, and that heaven has never forgotten the ones who dared to hurt the most sacred part of you. What if the part of you they hurt, the soft, trusting, beautiful part, was the most sacred thing about you? What if it wasn't your mistake to carry that innocence, but your greatest strength? The world does not value innocence. It mistakes it for naivety. It mocks it as weakness. But God never placed innocence in you to be discarded like a fragile toy. He placed it within you as a mirror of his own nature. You weren't foolish for believing in loyalty, love, and truth. You were reflecting divinity in a place that worships deception. They didn't see the value of what they were holding when they hurt you. That's always how it happens, isn't it? People mishandle what they don't understand. But what they wounded wasn't just your personality. It was the part of your soul that hadn't yet been polluted by fear or selfishness. The part that kept showing up even when the room grew colder, the silence thicker, and the betrayal louder. And though they dismissed it, rolled their eyes at your sincerity, called you dramatic or too emotional, heaven was watching, not with judgment, but with awe. There's a kind of strength the world can't measure. It doesn't roar, it doesn't boast, it simply remains. Quiet, patient, steady, that strength was yours. And in keeping your innocence intact through all the ridicule, the emotional ambushes, the half-hearted apologies and gaslighting, you bore something rare, the image of God in its gentlest form. Your ability to love without manipulation, to believe in people's goodness even after being burned, that wasn't foolish, it was holy. And that's why God took it personally when they harmed it. Because what they touched was not just your heart, it was the temple within you. They desecrated what God had carefully preserved, and now you wonder why you feel a different kind of sadness. Not the kind that fades with time, but the kind that echoes in your bones. It's because a sacred part of you was violated, not just by action, but by intent. They didn't just hurt you, they dismissed the very core of who you are, and in doing so, they provoked something far greater than your own strength. They provoked the attention of heaven. You see, God doesn't always stop the pain. He allows it not out of cruelty, but because He's writing a deeper story. But allowing something and ignoring something are not the same. He allowed it, yes, but He never ignored it. Every tear that fell when no one was looking, every time you questioned your worth because of how they treated you, every time you swallowed your pain to protect someone else's comfort, He saw it all. And now, what you must understand is this: God is not a passive observer of pain. He is a jealous protector of purity. And what they bruised, He has vowed to restore and, more importantly, to defend. Your innocence was not lost. It was entrusted into the hands of a God who doesn't forget what people try to bury. And as they move on, forgetting what they did, laughing at the memory of your breakdown, you must remember this: God is not done. He's not even begun to show you what He will do with the part of you they tried to kill. Because what they didn't understand is this: when you touch the innocent, you touch the divine. And when you wound what's divine, you awaken divine justice. And that justice doesn't come as lightning or thunder. It often comes as silence that grows heavy on the guilty. A restlessness that turns sleep into torment. A loss of peace that no success or distraction can cover. Because when God takes something personally, He doesn't strike back in rage. He surrounds in consequence. He lets them taste their own intentions, watch their own shadows grow, until they realize the horror of what they've done. And it all begins not because you fought back, but because you didn't. Your silence triggered a storm in the heavens. This is why your healing matters more than ever. Because your story is not just about what they did, it's about what God is about to do. They pierced what was pure, but purity, unlike pride, doesn't crumble, it resurrects. And that resurrection begins when you realize they didn't take your innocence, they only revealed its value. When they ridiculed your gentleness, they weren't just making fun of your personality, they were scorning a divine presence. Every time you were told to toughen up, to be realistic, to stop caring so much, what they were really saying was, we're uncomfortable with the light you carry. Because purity makes people uneasy. It exposes what they've buried. It reminds them of who they were before they were jaded. And so they mock it, not because it's wrong, but because it's rare. They don't mock what's irrelevant, they mock what threatens them. And in you they saw something they had long abandoned: belief. Belief in good, in truth, in commitment, in redemption. And when a heart still believes, it unsettles those who live in pretended apathy. That's why they laughed when you cried. That's why they downplayed your loyalty, mocked your prayers, rolled their eyes at your hope. You weren't just too kind, you were too alive, too radiant, too unwilling to play their games. But here's what they forgot. The purity in you was not self-made. It wasn't a personality trait, it was a divine imprint. And by scorning it, they weren't just scorning you, they were scorning the one who breathed it into you. Your tears became holy, your pain became sacred, not because you wanted it to be, but because God chose to make it so. You became a living testimony that innocence still breathes in a world poisoned by pride, and that made you dangerous to the darkness within them. They thought you were naive, but what they missed is this: your purity was power. The power to resist bitterness, the power to keep showing love in a world that only knows transaction, the power to hold on to integrity when everything around you screamed compromise. That power didn't make you weak, it made you untouchable, and they hated that. So they tried to dim your light, not because it wasn't bright, but because it was blinding. But light, once released, cannot be put back in the bottle. They can cover their eyes, but they can't erase the shine. And now, in the aftermath, as your heart quietly rebuilds, their hearts wrestle with a truth they cannot escape. What they tried to destroy is what they now wish they had. That sense of peace, of real joy, of connection with something higher, it haunted them in your presence, and now, in your absence, it condemns them. Because when you leave, it's not just your silence that echoes, it's the absence of God's fingerprint in their daily life. You didn't just walk away, you took something with you. The quiet presence that made them feel safe, understood, and whole, even when they didn't admit it. And now they're left with the noise they once called freedom. But you are not lost. You are rising. And as your purity begins to blossom again, this time stronger, wiser, guarded by divine hands, what they mocked will become their greatest regret. Because you were never a fool for being pure. You were favored, and the favor of God, once mocked, will now be magnified. There is a misconception among the hurt, that if justice is not instant, it is absent. But you must understand, heaven operates on a timing that human pride cannot outrun and human guilt cannot escape. Every cry you held in your chest, every night your pillow soaked in silent weeping, every moment you wondered if you were crazy for feeling so much, none of it disappeared into nothing. It was all collected, each fragment of your shattered spirit, each gasp you swallowed when they spoke about you as if you weren't in the room. These became evidence. Not in a courtroom built by men, but in a throne room built by eternity. God does not forget what man tries to ignore. The world calls it over, but God calls it ongoing. And he has not gone quiet because he's disinterested. He has gone quiet because he is preparing. You see, the pain that they inflicted on you, so casually, so carelessly, is now echoing through a divine memory that doesn't fade with time. They thought they were simply moving on, but they were moving deeper into the gaze of God, and when God watches, he doesn't blink. There is something holy about suffering in silence, not because it's romantic, not because you deserved it, but because it purifies. It filters the heart through fire, and that fire does not destroy what is real, it reveals it. Your pain revealed that even when your soul was bruised, your spirit bowed but never broke. Even when you questioned yourself, you never betrayed yourself. Even when they painted your innocence as weakness, you never surrendered to their narrative, and heaven took note of that strength. They thought your pain was just another moment to brush off, but what they did not see is that God was writing a story, not just of what you endured, but of who you became while enduring. Every betrayal became a sentence, every insult a paragraph, every dismissal a divine punctuation mark. And the story is not over, it's building. God is not just documenting, He's designing a reversal, so complete that those who witnessed your fall will one day question how they missed. You are not being ignored, you are being watched, intensely, lovingly, fiercely. And what they did, though buried in time, is still fresh in the sight of God. It does not fade because they've moved on. It remains because you lived through it. The world forgets pain quickly when it's not theirs, but God carries your pain as if it were His own, because it was. When they hurt the innocent part of you, they touched something sacred to Him, and that is why their peace is temporary. That is why their comfort is deceptive. You may see them smiling, succeeding, socializing, but deep inside, something trembles. Because even if their conscience is silent, their spirit knows. It knows it violated something eternal, and that awareness, though quiet now, will become thunder when heaven chooses to respond. Do not measure justice by the speed of its arrival. Measure it by the weight of its precision. And trust this, God has never once allowed a wound to remain unredeemed or a sacred soul to remain unavenged. It may not come in the form you expected, but it will come, because your tears did not disappear. They were harvested, and heaven is waiting for the moment to water your future with them. Which leads us, deeper still, into the waiting, into the silence, into the timing of the divine, because sometimes the longer He waits, the more perfect the justice becomes. It is the waiting that bruises the heart the most, the days where nothing seems to change, the months where your prayers seem to hit a ceiling, the years where those who hurt you flourish, while you quietly bleed in corners no one sees. But if there is one truth that must anchor you, it is this: God's silence is never indifference, it is design. You may think He has delayed, but in His timing, delay is not denial, it is development. While you feel forgotten, heaven is not inactive. It is gathering, orchestrating, aligning people, moments, and consequences that will not only expose what was hidden, but elevate what was ignored. Justice is not delayed to punish you. It is delayed to perfect what will come to pass. Think of it. If God had acted the moment you begged Him to, it would have satisfied your wounds, but not your legacy. But God is not only after healing your pain, He's after redeeming your story. And to redeem something fully, He lets it unravel completely. Because when He restores, He doesn't want just applause, He wants transformation. He doesn't want to just fix the brokenness. He wants to display your wholeness as proof that no pain, no betrayal, no cruelty will ever write the final chapter of a soul that belongs to Him. That's why He delays, not because He's unsure, but because He's precise. You see, if justice came too soon, it might land on the surface. But when God waits, He reaches the roots. He lets them think they've won. He lets them believe you're forgotten. Because pride is loudest just before the fall, and arrogance is most blind when it assumes silence means safety. But beneath that silence, God is moving. He's weaving a justice that doesn't just punish, it teaches. One that doesn't just humble, it awakens. The ones who hurt you are not off the hook. They're being drawn in, not to blessing, but to realization, to confrontation with themselves, to the haunting echo of your kindness, your love, your innocence, reverberating louder than any accusation ever could. And when that justice lands, it won't just be visible, it will be undeniable, because it will come at the very moment they believed they escaped it. It will arrive in the form they cannot avoid, through the very paths they once bragged about. And that's the kind of justice God delivers, not just appropriate, but poetic. So yes, you've waited, and yes, you're tired, but you must know. The longer it seems God takes, the more deliberate the justice becomes. Because what He's preparing isn't just for your comfort, it's for His glory. He's not just healing you, He's teaching the world who you are and who He is through you. There is a sacred irony in how the world perceives power. It looks for loud voices, bold fists, dominant presence, and unshakable certainty. But what it cannot comprehend is the kind of power that speaks softly, walks gently, and trusts silently in something unseen. They looked at you and saw vulnerability. They mistook your grace for weakness, your silence for surrender, your tears for defeat. But they didn't know what shielded you. They didn't see who stood behind you when you bowed your head in prayer or lifted your eyes in quiet defiance. They thought they had you cornered. They thought that by wounding your heart, by stripping away your hope, by undermining your worth, they had taken away your strength. But they never realized that your strength didn't come from you, it came through you. It came from the one who guards the meek, who lifts up the humble, who draws near to the broken-hearted and gives them a resilience the world can neither measure nor explain. And that strength doesn't shout, it endures. It doesn't react, it waits. You were never unprotected, you were hidden. Hidden under divine timing, hidden under spiritual covering, hidden in a process that would not reveal its meaning until the ones who thought they broke you finally realized. They couldn't touch what heaven had marked as sacred. They never had access to your soul, only your surface. And what they struck was never your core. That's why, even after all the pain, something in you still whispers, "I'm not done yet." That whisper isn't yours alone, it's divine. Because real power doesn't always fight back. It stands firm. Real power doesn't always confront. It endures without becoming what hurt it. And in that quiet endurance, a strange thing begins to happen. Heaven takes notice, and not just heaven. The atmosphere around you shifts. The people who once overlooked you begin to see something they cannot name, a calm that doesn't match your circumstance, a glow that remains after the fire, a steadiness they cannot rattle, no matter how they try. And that is when the truth begins to break through their illusions. What they tried to destroy was never alone. It was guarded by something beyond their reach. You see, God doesn't always stop the attack, but He always limits its access. Like Job, you were tested but not abandoned, touched but not taken. The enemy needed permission to reach you, and even then he was only allowed so far. They could hurt you, but they could not own the consequences. And now, as they walk forward, thinking the damage is permanent, heaven has already started the recovery plan, not just for your healing, but for their revelation. They will come to see that you are not fragile, you are fortified, not broken, you are becoming. And all their laughter, their gossip, their efforts to minimize your pain, to discredit your goodness, to make you question yourself, they were seen, not by the world perhaps, but by the one who keeps record of the righteous and repays without error. And His repayment doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like restoration so grand it renders their actions meaningless. Their betrayal becomes a shadow, your rise becomes the story. And still they won't understand how it happened, Because in their world you were supposed to collapse. You were supposed to be silent, defeated, erased. But instead, you became more rooted, more luminous, more at peace. That peace, unshaken, undeserved, undeniable, will haunt them more than any punishment. It will remind them that they misunderstood the very essence of your spirit. Because what they called weakness, God called strength. What they tried to suppress, heaven preserved. And what they tried to kill, God is now preparing to elevate. Restoration isn't always the returning of what was taken. Sometimes it's the revealing of what was never destroyed. You see, what they tried to kill wasn't a possession. It was a part of your being. Your laughter, your trust, your tenderness, the way you saw beauty in people and light in darkness, the way you dreamed with an open heart and believed with no need for proof. That's what they tried to suffocate, and for a while, it may have seemed they succeeded. Your smile became rare, your guard grew taller, your voice quieter. You began to second-guess the very qualities that once defined you. You started wondering if maybe they were right. Maybe it was foolish to feel deeply, to love quickly, to stand with loyalty in a world that rewards manipulation. But what you didn't know is that those qualities were never gone. They were in hiding, waiting, sheltered by the very hands of the God who gave them to you. You were not broken beyond repair. You were protected beneath layers of survival. And now, as God begins to remove the dust, as the heaviness starts to lift, what's emerging is not a copy of who you were. It's a stronger version of who you were always meant to be. The restoration doesn't return you to your old self. It reveals the self that never had a chance to fully blossom because it was buried too early under shame, rejection, betrayal. But the soil of betrayal has one unintended gift. It fertilizes growth. The very thing they thought would end you is becoming the place from which your next chapter will rise. And they won't understand how you're still breathing, still dreaming, still believing, because they thought they stole your spark. But God preserved it in a chamber no human cruelty could reach. And now He is calling it forward, not with noise or announcements, but with quiet openings, new connections, new chances to trust, new waves of peace that have no source in your surroundings. And with every restoration comes a realization. They never had the final word. They were never the authors of your identity. They were merely a footnote in a story God never stopped writing. And as you begin to feel joy again, not the fragile kind that depends on people's approval, but the unshakable kind that comes from being known by God, you will begin to see the fullness of the restoration. Because it doesn't stop at healing your wounds. It includes resurrecting your voice, your creativity, your capacity to love, your desire to try again, not with naivety, but with wisdom, not with desperation, but with assurance. God is not just returning what was stolen. He's multiplying what was left. And the fruit of this restoration will not just satisfy your soul, it will confuse your enemies, because nothing terrifies the darkness more than someone who was supposed to stay broken, but instead chose to rise radiant. God does not merely restore in secret. He prepares a table in the presence of your enemies. That's not just poetic justice, it's divine intention. Because there are some lessons that can only be taught through visibility. Those who try to bury your light will not just hear rumors of your rise, they will witness it, not to feed your pride, but to confront their own. God is not in the business of private vindication when the pain was public. What they mocked in public, He will honor in public. What they trampled in front of others, He will crown before their eyes. This isn't revenge, it's revelation. The truth will no longer whisper, it will stand tall, and your life will become a living rebuke to their mockery. The same heart they said was too soft, too trusting, too pure. It will become the very reason doors open, people listen, and favor flows, because God is not simply giving you your life back. He's giving you back everything they thought they silenced: dreams, joy, peace, laughter, only this time with unshakable roots. And those who once walked away without guilt will come to terms with the echo of what they lost when they hurt you. That echo is the sound of grace leaving their presence. For in mistreating what was pure, they exiled themselves from something sacred. Not just you, but the atmosphere that followed you, the protection that surrounded you, the anointing that quietly rested on everything you touched. And now they will watch, not because you wish to be seen, but because God wants it known, that His justice is not just eternal, it is exact, that His love is not just gentle, it is fierce, that what is done to the innocent never goes unseen, never goes unanswered, and never ends in defeat. Your story will not be marked by the betrayal, but by the rise that followed. The rise they did not believe in, the rise they never saw coming. So if you've been walking through shadows, holding pieces of yourself, wondering if God still remembers, know this: not only does He remember, He's preparing a revelation, one that doesn't just lift you up, it sets the record straight. You were never the problem. You were never too much. You were the light they weren't ready for. And now God is lifting that light higher, not so they can applaud, but so they can understand that when they hurt the most innocent part of you, God took it personally.